Storytelling is probably one of the most important skills when it comes to messaging and copywriting because it is so much the foundation of your message and what you do and how you talk about what you do. But there's also a lot of really bad advice out there about how to do storytelling. And so I want to break down why that advice is not so great and what you can do instead. So let's dive in. This episode specifically is going to focus on small stories. And so when I talk about small stories, I'm talking about little moments that happen naturally in your day-to-day life. And I want to differentiate it from your brand story. So your brand story is kind of the big picture story of what you do, right? It's how you started your business, why you started your business, what has changed in your business over the years, what have you learned, how have you changed your approach, what kinds of clients do you work with? It's all very big picture. And it's an important story to have. But when it comes to creating content like writing LinkedIn posts and writing emails, small stories are really, really big because they illustrate what you can do for clients in small ways that are also really clear. So that's something that I talked about in the last few episodes if you didn't listen to those. And so for me, when I'm thinking about small moments, right, it's not that I want to talk about just random things in my life. So like when I'm thinking about what do I want to talk about in my content, it might be an idea I got from looking at a billboard. Side note that is one of my favorite activities is when I'm driving is reading billboards and critiquing their copy. So sometimes I see something, whether it's like on a billboard or on a TV ad, that I'm like, oh, this is interesting. Like my people will benefit from hearing about this, right? Maybe it's a pattern that you see across multiple clients. Like if I'm noticing people struggle with the same thing over and over again, I might bring that to light, right? Maybe it is a behind the scenes decision that you made, right? So why you decided to do something, why you're changing the way that you approach something. And it might even be like a shift, right, in how you think about something from a year ago to how you think about it now. Because that's the thing is you are the expert in your industry. You know more than your clients. And so they look to you as a leader, as somebody to look up to, right? I look to my accountant and my bookkeeper to give me direction on where to go and what decisions to make. And so it's going to be the same for your industry, right? And so those changes, what you're learning, what you're seeing in the industry, those are all really great things to tap into when you are thinking about small little stories. One thing to avoid that I feel like I haven't seen recently because I haven't been on social media as much, but not like trying to force it. And what I mean by forcing it is like taking something like super unconnected to business and trying to connect it to business. So like being like, hey, I went to my local coffee shop this morning and ordered a coffee and something happened. And somehow this is like a very meaningful, deep metaphor about business and entrepreneurship and how I approach my work. And sure, you can make it work, but a lot of the times, like it feels like a stretch, right? You can tell that it's a stretch. And as somebody who is an expert in your industry, like you don't need to stretch that. You're in your business every single day. You have plenty of relevant material that you can talk about. And so tapping into that is going to be huge for storytelling. So let's talk about what storytelling isn't and what to avoid. Stories are not meant to be your therapist. It's not about trauma dumping. It's not about being super vulnerable. It's not about sharing things that you should be sharing with your therapist or with your close family and friends. And it's tricky, right? It's a tricky line because there is a lot of power in sharing your story, right? Like I share about leaving teaching, about switching careers. I'm writing a book about it, about why I left teaching. And there is power there, right? Like I think memoirs are super powerful. I love reading memoirs because you're sharing your story. You're connecting with other people who have the same story or a similar story, and you're making people feel heard, right? When it comes to your business, are you sharing the story because it helps your ideal clients see themselves in your work? It helps them understand your approach and your expertise or, what you do? Or are you sharing it to make people feel emotionally close to you, right? So that they want to purchase from you. And so this is really like where it gets a little bit icky, because if your traumatic experiences are not connected to your work and to your process or how you help people, are you using that to monetize your offer, right? And for me, like, that's kind of a hard line, because the trust that I have with my audience, with my clients, that is the most important thing to me, because that is what is allowing me to build a sustainable business. So especially right now with the bad economy, with us being in a trust recession and people having a hard time actually affording new investments, how are you building that trust with people, right? And I think when you fall into that emotional vulnerability piece, like, yes, you might get some clients sooner, but I think that trust falls off if the actual marketing and the actual transformation isn't there, and then people feel like they were being duped. And so I think it's hard, because a lot of people who teach storytelling teach, right? Like, you want to talk about a life-altering moment. You want to talk about something that was super traumatic, because if you've been taught that, right, you replicate it. And so I talk about this in the crossover episode I did with Sydney about business coaches being MLMs, right? But this story of, hey, I invested like my last, $500 in coaching and it changed my life. And like, maybe that was true, but like, is it true for everybody? And then is it actually reflective of the outcomes of the program? And so I think if you are being told that like the only way to do storytelling is to share these like life-altering, big traumatic moments, or even like the day-to-day, like, getting your coffee, doing your skincare routine, like, you don't have to share those things. They're not actually adding to your expertise, adding to your body of work that shows you're an expert. And so maybe you feel like, well, what do I actually talk about, right? And so I think one like fun little nerd activity for you is, if you are watching TV and you're watching some commercials, like thinking about like, what's the story there? Because I don't know, I watch sports, and so I get a lot of insurance commercials, and the insurance commercials aren't necessarily like, Sally got sick and, needed life insurance for her family so that they were, it doesn't go into like these really specific stories, but it still illustrates this idea of like family and taking care of one another. And that's really like the heart of the story behind it. And so when you're thinking about your clients and their results and their transformation, you don't have to really talk about like a specific client, but you can look at, hey, when I'm looking at all of my clients, what's the same about them? What transformation have they gotten? And how can I talk about that, right? And really showing the transformation instead of telling, and using those examples, whether it's like the patterns you see with your clients or something that you are doing differently in business or shifting your approach. That is what's going to position you as somebody that they can trust, as somebody that they would go to when they need help with something. Really leaning into that and creating visuals. I always think about, when I was teaching second grade, I was teaching this writing lesson, and we were talking about beginning, middle, and end. And I could sit there and be like, hey, we're going to write a story. The story has a beginning, middle, and end. But instead, I modeled it for them. I showed them, right? So I told this story. I always remember this moment because it was so funny. I told this story. My cat got stuck in the hallway one day because I accidentally locked her out on my way to work. And so she ended up pooping in a plant. And my kids thought that was hilarious, but it also illustrated this point of like beginning, middle, and end. And when you're thinking about marketing, your stories are not necessarily going to be beginning, middle, and end. They're actually probably going to be more like beginning, this is the problem that people are facing, and this is the transformation that they got, and then middle, this is how we approach the work and this is what we did. That's actually probably a more realistic way to think about stories when you do your marketing. But the point is that when you tell stories, people get a visual, right? They get that clarity that they might not necessarily have had by just talking about something, and they make your ideas sticky, right? And so that's what's going to make you more memorable is like thinking about those clear and specific visuals and leaning into your expertise. Like if you are showing up to work every day, you have things to talk about. You know what's going on in your industry. Even if you are at the point where you have 0 clients, like you know a lot about what you do, right? You know more than your audience. And so position yourself as that leader, as that expert by telling these like mini stories. A note on this, as we are wrapping up this episode, don't feel like you have to share every single thing in your business or your life, right? Like you can strategically share what makes sense for you. And if you are not a personal brand, then you can still share stories, right? Like thinking about like the storytelling in commercials. What is the story that you're telling? How do you help your people visualize what they want? And how do you help them visualize where they are now and where they're going? And every story you tell should reinforce your messaging and your brand and not just exist to exist, right? Like there should be an actual reason behind your story. Maybe it's an insight. Maybe you're trying to show the transformation. So that is something that I do with my clients inside Copy Classroom, is really thinking about the stories that they are telling and fleshing them out, figuring out what they are actually showing, like finding the specificity behind these stories, and then deciding like where they belong. Sometimes people add stories to a sales page and I'm like, hey, this would actually be much better in an email. And so Copy Classroom is a great place to get feedback without pressure and share in a way that is aligned with your values and is strategic and intentional. So with that being said, don't shy away from storytelling. It is a really good strategy, but really think about how does it line up with your values and how can you do it in a way that feels good and is still very effective. Thank you so much for listening, and until next time. That's a wrap on today's episode. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to rate and leave a review on your preferred listening platform. If you haven't, make sure you subscribe for weekly episodes about how to make money and work with the dreamiest of clients without having to get dressed in the morning. Make sure to check out the show notes down below, and I'll see you in the next episode.